The other is that there would be two massive genres of prayer. One, prayers of thanksgiving, of gratitude. There are hundreds of them. And the other would be prayers of awe, of wonder, So yes, these petitionary prayers have snuck into the prayer book, but they're not predominantly what Jewish prayer is about. And Jewish prayer, if the actual word for prayer is called a reflexive verb, lehit palel, which means to turn inward, to look at ourselves. Prayer is really meant to change us by making us a more awestruck, grateful person. And most people confuse the idea of prayer and wish. Prayer is not a wish, but I cannot in any way deny, just as I tried to say in my sermon last night, there's more than one idea about God's role in the Torah and in the Talmud. There is not a consistent theology in the Torah, and there is not a consistent theology in the Talmud. So yes, there are examples of an omnipotent God who answers prayers. Sometimes the answer is no, which can be quite inexplicable. But I would not say that that is the predominant form or function of Jewish prayer, although it is in there. So I would just say, let's not let the exception become the rule.
Anyone else want to weigh in? Don't be shy.
I mean, it's a variation on that, which I would say, yeah, I mean, by and large, my father and I get into this conversation all the time because he says to me, do you really believe that there's a God that needs you to pray and listens to your prayers and answers your prayers? And my response is generally that I don't pray for God, I pray for me. And that prayer, I agree with Steve, is not always, but most often about, going inside and trying to change and grow myself as a person. And that's what I'm asking for. If I'm asking for anything, is the strength.
And I also think it's pretty clear God doesn't answer wish prayers. If God wishes, the world would be very different and our lives would be very different. So even though that strain of thought and that kind of theology exists within Judaism, it's pretty easy to disprove.
Okay, I'm going to try to find one more Yom Kippur question, and then there's so many questions coming in. Some are long, it takes me a little bit to absorb them. There was one I wanted to say. Oh, okay. This is from Claudia Sevenini. Some of you mentioned in your sermons a variation of, quote, try to understand the other even when you don't agree, end quote. But does it come with caveats? In a bitterly divided country, aren't there principles we find offensive to the point I don't have to be understanding?
Can I start with this one?
Sure, please.
I think, listen, there's multiple ways to answer this question, and we wear multiple hats just as God wears multiple hats. Today on Yom Kippur, a way to answer that question, and in my personal opinion about the High Holidays, is that the High Holidays ask us, for radical change as into who we are. That it's not just to be a little better, but it's to really recognize your best self, to let your soul speak out. And I'd say at our best selves and at our best, yeah, the High Holidays ask us to do the unthinkable. And sometimes that is really listen to someone that we completely disagree with. It doesn't say that we have to agree with them. But I think for me personally, I want to end Ne'ilah in a few hours from now, knowing that I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and I'm not just going to be a little better, but I am going to try and have a completely different worldview. Now that's probably going to be shattered by lunchtime, but it's my ultimate hope, and it's my ultimate goal. And so I would say the aim and the goal of the High Holy Days is for us to radically think, how can we be different?
Anyone? John?
Yeah, I just think when we think about debate from a Jewish perspective also, it's not about agreeing with another person. We can radically disagree with them. But as the Talmud talks about Hillel and Shammai, who debated constantly, what made Hillel so great is that he was so able to understand and articulate Shammai's position that he would start by articulating that position in order to bolster his own perspective. That in order, if we really want to, if we want to really get into debate, if we really want to be firm in our belief system, we have to actually understand as much as we can the other perspective and understand and spend the time trying to really delve into it, because you can't make as substantive an argument to counter something if you haven't spent the time to do the research to try and understand where that person is coming from, even if you don't agree with them. So I think I see it as, I completely don't understand some of the things happening in our country, but for me to just do that from my couch without trying to do the research to understand where those people or those perspectives are coming from, I'm not going to be in a position where I can really debate to the depth that I should be able to debate. So I think it's about pushing us to really try and do the research that needs to be done in order to make arguments based on the work.
Yeah, and it's not that we disagree, it's how we disagree. Right? And I think it's about civility. What the rabbis meant by peace, this word shalom, they did not mean the absence of conflict. What they meant was an atmosphere in which conflict could be contained civilly. They didn't mean no conflict. They meant conflict at a very high level of respect. That's the ideal. It's not about agreeing. And no matter how ill-informed the other might be, there's still a dignified way to respond. And you know, I don't want to get anywhere near politics, but I would say generally in debates, political debates, the person who is able to respond articulately while remaining above the fray generally is perceived as the more admirable person. And I think that's a very Jewish point of view.
There's a follow-up question here. It touches on the political, but you might consider it in kind of a religious context. And that if the point of the debate is fact, it's unassailable fact. The sky is blue. No, it's orange. How do you kind of hold those two concepts together in the idea that I respect your point of view, I disagree with your premise, but you're a good person, maybe, and we should we should continue our debate in a civil way. I mean,
I have found a lot of value in a very simple sentence, which is, tell me more about that.
Okay, fair enough. That leads to another question, and this we're going to kind of try to move on a little bit. This is from Marlo Wolf. I'm hearing something in the background. Is that somebody who wants to say something? No, okay. Many agnostic Jews find themselves ignored or excluded from synagogues and have been forced to go elsewhere to find expressions of their Jewish life. As rabbis, what are your points of views about agnostic Jews, and what is your message to agnostic Jews?
I'll start. Hi, Marlo. I'll start. I think that, and I say this frequently, particularly in these theology meetings many of us have with bar and bat mitzvah students and their families, which is, because I would take it one step further, Marlo, and say, you know, I have a dozen people a week that I talk to that say, well, Rabbi, I'm Jewish, I love being Jewish, but I'm an atheist, right? And most of the time when we actually have a conversation about that, they're not an atheist, they're actually agnostic, they just aren't clear on what the difference is. And I am a firm believer that to be an agnostic, to not be sure if and what there is and if and what you believe, I don't mean to be simplistic about it, is kind of mainstream, middle of the tent Jewish practice and Jewish thought about theology. And I talked about this briefly last week in my sermon about our conversion program and about what is radical to non-Jews about Judaism. And one of those things is that there's not one single prescripted theology that we enforce, right? Or that we even have. And that ability to question, that ability to wrestle with what God is and isn't, right? We talk a lot about that being baked into the name, is Yisrael, one who wrestles with God. I think that's more than just literally in a physical way. And so I would say, I think it's a shame for agnostic Jews to find themselves ignored and excluded from synagogues, because I think the synagogue should be a place that welcomes those conversations. And I think that often, look, we don't, I would say sometimes we don't talk about theology enough. We don't talk about God enough, right? I've heard Rabbi Leder say many times that he grew up in a great synagogue with cool rabbis, and you could talk about anything you wanted except God. And so I think the more we engage in these conversations, hopefully the more it's clear that, you know, this is a very safe space and welcoming space for that.
You know, as a footnote to that, a big footnote, Steve, I was struck by a phrase you used in your sermon last night, which really spoke to me, because I, like many people, I'm sure, wrestle with this concept. You used the phrase "as if."
That's right.
Maybe you could just take 1 minute and just kind of synthesize how the "as if" sort of connects the metaphorical with the literal.
Well, I think our sages had as profound, as we're as profoundly agnostic as most of us are, because the truth is none of us really know. None of us. And that's just the truth of it. And that's why I think there's sort of a polytheism in Judaism, of these multiple views of God. God has a personality. God is sometimes, I tried to sort of quickly demonstrate this, sometimes in control, other times not, sometimes above the fray, other times angry and, you know, manipulated by man almost. So this as if concept for me does kind of not only make it about deed rather than creed, but I also think it really unites all 3 or 4 strands of Judaism in this sense. An Orthodox Jew may behave in a certain way because it is God's will. I may behave in a certain way because, in my educated opinion, it's the right thing to do, okay? But in any case, I can behave as if it's God's will without it being God's will. We're talking about metaphor here. No one can know God's will because no one can fully know God. We can sense it, we can feel it, but none of us know. So I find the as if, this idea of we can't be literal about this. I often, when I'm teaching Torah, I talk about the difference between facts and truths. The Torah is not a book of facts. Noah didn't get all those animals on a boat. But that's not what the story is about. The story is about the fact that the destiny of this planet and every creature on it is in our hand. That's the truth of the story. The facts, frankly, couldn't be factual, and it doesn't matter. So I think when you start looking at Judaism as a series of facts rather than truths, and as a series of literalisms rather than metaphor, I certainly wouldn't be a rabbi. I wouldn't go to synagogue. We have to have a much more, I think, sophisticated understanding of what the sages were trying to do, right? When they were talking about God as king, they weren't talking literally about God as a monarch. They were talking about the fact that we are not always in control of our own destiny, and we are subject to forces greater than we, right? As if there is a king. So I find it an extremely helpful way to live my life, as if there is a God who watches, as if there is a God who weighs, as if there is a scale in heaven upon which our deeds are weighed, right? I find it an enormously positive way to live. And I think it's a truer read on what the sages were trying to articulate than a literalist approach. The literalist approach, frankly, is child's play.
I think a lot of people will find that as a comforting explanation. I want to switch gears a little bit. It's been sort of a momentous year for the synagogue in its merger with university. And there's a couple of questions about that. And one of whom comes from somebody in the next room who's related to me. And the question is, mergers are often rife, R-I-F-E, with challenges. How has it been merging our synagogues? Does the clergy see eye to eye? Joel Simonds, I bet you'd love to take that one on.
Let's let Joel Simonds go first because he's the only one who can speak about it from that side of things.
No, I think it's a great question. And I think part of the beauty, difficulty of these high holy days that we can't be in person, but I think part of the beauty of these high holy days for me, and I'm not just saying this, I'm really feeling it, is that I've actually felt this beautiful blend of both communities coming together in terms of our music, in terms of our words, in terms of the way I think in which we approach this new year. And so, yes, mergers will always be complicated, but from a clergy perspective, I've known many of these clergy for years now, so part of it is fulfilling a dream, but also, I think whenever you can find a way in which you can strengthen the Jewish community, then that has to be it. Looking back, if we were to fast forward 200, 300, 400 years from now, and we look back and we say, did we do all we can do to strengthen the Jewish community and to make sure that Jews, individual Jews and a collective Jewish community, did we make sure that they had a more powerful experience? I think the answer is a loud yes. And so I think from my perspective, just being able to find the way in which we are both honoring our past, but also creating a new, it's been beautiful.
Joel, as everybody at Wilshire Boulevard knows, that the Carr Center has been an integral part of what we do for the community. Beau has been deeply involved in that since the beginning. But you have also got a background in social justice. Could you, because most of us don't know you as well as our other rabbis, could you give us the Cliff Notes version of some of the work you do and how that might fold in to the work of the merged synagogues?
Sure, absolutely. I direct an organization that I and a number of wonderful individuals founded about 4 years ago. It's called the Jewish Center for Justice, and we deal with education, leadership development, and social justice at various levels to advocate for issues that we find near and dear to us as a Jewish community, from environmental justice to economic justice, just to name a few.
Is it conceivable, the State Department today issued a list of where the, I think it's 65,000 Afghan refugees will be moved into various states around the country. California is scheduled to absorb the most, about 5,300. Is it conceivable that this could be a portfolio that you would embrace either as part of your organization or something you could bring into the temple?
So as a part of my organization, it absolutely is something that we are going to embrace. Refugees is definitely something that is a part of what we do. And, we rarely go in something alone. We always work within coalition. So we are working with a coalition. The head organization, both nationally and locally with this issue, is HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. And so we really look for them for direction, Jewish Family Services as well. They have really been at the forefront of this. So we really look to them to figure out ways in which we could help, from monetarily to volunteerism to whatnot.
Okay, now flipping the coin to the other side, Steve Leder from Lee Wagman, in a different vein, what has been the biggest challenge of the merger from a rabbinic perspective, and what's the biggest opportunity?
From a rabbinic perspective, it really hasn't been challenging because, as Joel put it so well, we're all trying to reach this higher ground and do the right thing by the community. And so I really, it's been handled so beautifully by people with good intentions on both sides. There really hasn't been a rabbinic challenge. Joel's a fantastic guy. Kara's a fantastic human being in Cantor, and Joel's a fantastic human being in Rabbi. And, we're already used to a big staff. I think if it was a smaller, you are too, Joel Nickerson. I think if we were a smaller organization that wasn't already used to running multiple units, so to speak, we have 3 early childhood centers, we have 2 elementary schools, we have 3 religious schools, we have 2 camps, we have 3 campuses. I think that's why it's not really particularly disruptive or unusual for us we have the Car Center, we have the Audrey Ermis Pavilion now coming online. We're kind of a holding company in that way. And so this was not at all challenging or destabilizing. I mean, there are challenges ahead vis-a-vis the physical plant and creating programs that really serve the community there. But from a personnel perspective at the clergy level, it's been beautiful, really. And the big opportunity, of course, is the excess capacity that exists at University Synagogue in their early childhood center and in the religious school. They have room for a lot more kids, and we're turning kids away from the Ermis campus. So that's a huge opportunity. The sanctuary, I personally feel, is a better prayer space than what we had at the Ermis campus. And there's a whole part of Los Angeles that it's really convenient to, that campus. And here's the other thing at a more nuanced level that I would say. Wilshire Boulevard Temple has never really been a neighborhood shul. We couldn't be, because Olympic and Barrington and Wilshire and Harvard are not really neighborhoods. They're not neighborhood locations. They're very urban. And it's not a place where a lot of Jews could just kind of walk to synagogue. And I've always craved that kind of neighborhood shul vibe, and we've never been able to really develop it. And I think this is our opportunity to do it. And I'm very excited about that. So Lee, I would say that's the big cultural opportunity. But honestly, from a personnel and management standpoint, it's been easy for me. It hasn't been easy for everyone.
I want to throw out a couple of I hope easier questions. Well, maybe none of these is easy, but we'll take a shot at this. Somebody asked, some anonymous person asked, as an oppressed people, where do we stand on being considered racist because we and our children are born white according to anti-racist ideology? I've heard a little bit of this. I have friends who do not consider themselves white. They consider themselves Jewish. How do we make sense of this?
Anybody want it? I'll take it if nobody wants it.
I'll
Go ahead.
say something brief, and which probably won't answer it, so then you can still take it, Steve. I'm trying to remember, but I want to say it was written in the 60s, and I don't remember by who. Somebody else might remember. There was a piece written, I believe, called "Are Jews White Folk?" Or I believe that was the title of it. And so that this question of, beyond just appearance, at least, and when I say appearance, I mean Ashkenazi Jews, right? Because that's part of the conversation too. Are Jews white, or do Jews enjoy white privilege, is how it's sometimes articulated to me. I think in some ways is a perennial question. And my answer to it usually is sometimes, right? Sometimes Jews, and that's more on the white privilege side of the conversation, but sometimes Jews enjoy white privilege because, yeah, I can walk into a room and you wouldn't know that I was Jewish necessarily, right? I remember having a conversation with an African-American friend of mine in college, and I had come back from work at the synagogue. I was wearing kippah, and I said, and somebody had sort of made a comment to me and about it. And I said, you see, it's a similar thing, which was the wrong thing to say, because he looked at me and he said, yeah, but you can take your kippah off. Right.
Yeah. I asked, it's so interesting how this has flipped. Beau reminded me of an essay by James Baldwin called The Harlem Ghetto, in which he addresses the issue of Black anti-Semitism by saying that, this was his thesis, not mine, that Black anti-Semitism was a way for Blacks to identify with white majoritarian culture, because white Anglo-Saxon Protestants were anti-Semites and the ruling class. And by being an anti-Semite, you could mimic that sort of, you could be in that club in that one way. And now it has completely flipped. And now we are seen, Jews are seen as, aren't seen any differently really than white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, which is in a way incredibly good news, because that's a kind of a normalization that Jews could only have dreamed of in America or anywhere in the world 100 years ago. So in a way, this normalizing of Jews, as strange as this sounds, as paradoxical as this sounds, is in one way a sign of progress, but it's also incredibly naive. And it's as naive as thinking of Blacks as monolithic in their beliefs and practices. It's just naive. Are some Jews Caucasian? Yes. Are men, more than 50% of the Jews in Israel are not. Are some Jews privileged? Yes. Are many not? Yes. So I think it shows a real lack of understanding and nuance. And I don't think white means white anymore. I mean, people were calling Larry Elder a Black white supremacist. So I don't pretend to understand what white means anymore, but I don't think it means Caucasian. The context in which you're asking the question, it is being redefined. I remember when my kids went to a private school when they were very young, and the school touted its diversity. And I felt it was one of the least diverse places I'd ever been, because I said, well, yeah, I don't know what you mean by diversity, because my kids know rich Asian kids and rich Black kids and rich Hispanic kids and rich white kids. I don't think that's very diverse at all. So I don't know what white means anymore, but to lump Jews in as being white and privileged, I think is just, really, really lacks nuance and sophistication, and it's just plain wrong.
I'll just
Okay.
add just a quick.
Go ahead, Joe. Go
Really
ahead.
quick. The Pew Study that came out this year showed that I think of the younger demographic of Jews, I think it's between 8 and 15% are Jews of color, and that's a growing number. That we also, as a Jewish community, need to get away from the assumption that Jewish people are just white Ashkenazi. That even, especially, I think at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, we're very lucky, both through the conversion program that Beau runs, but also just kind of the diversity of the people who decide to be a part of our community. So within our own community, we have it, but I think there is a growing awareness and also a recognition that Jewish organizations need to be aware that we need to be thinking about Jews of color in a different way than we have over the last decades or so. So I think that is going to be something in the next decade or so that we'll see some shifts in not only the programming, but the way in which we talk about how we define who is a Jew and Jewish identity and inclusion in a different way than we have in the past.
Hannah, I know we're supposed to be off at 4:15, but maybe you could give us a
We
few
can
more
we can
minutes.
go to 4:30. It's fine.
Oh, terrific, because there's a lot of questions and I'm kind of scrambling around to get to as many as I can. Lorraine Tamburino asks, if you can, it would be great to hear the rabbi's perspective on interfaith marriages and how they have helped interfaith marriages navigate Jewish faith and raising children as Jews, even if a parent is not entirely sold on Judaism. I mean, we could be here till tomorrow on that one, but
No, I don't think it's that. I believe the question, just to be clear, is about interfaith families, not about officiating or not officiating at
no, I
interfaith.
think that's right. I think that's right.
So, Beau has spent a lot of time. I'm going to kick this to you, Beau. Beau runs our conversion program. He has vast experience with families trying to navigate and negotiate. How do we raise Jewish children when both parents aren't Jewish and one might even be ambivalent? So, Beau, why don't you?
So I will say that as a caveat or disclaimer, perhaps my perspective and all of our perspectives are a little bit skewed in this, because I think more than half the battle is already won if they're talking to us about it. If they're at the synagogue, if they're kids in our school, if they're here, that's, in my opinion, like more than halfway there, right? I know there are lots of families, interfaith families, that are not connected in any way to a synagogue, that are not a part of, institutionalized Jewish life in any way, and are trying to figure that out. I think in a way, this is actually connected back to the Marlowe's question about theology and agnostic Jews, though, because I think that Judaism as a far broader kind of religious perspective than many non-Jews are familiar with, definitionally almost makes it a little bit more welcoming and a little bit more of a comforting space, I think, for families and for families to raise their kids. I spoke to an interfaith family, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, and they had gone through this process of a conversation as to they wanted their kids to grow up with some kind of ethical, moral, religious, framework. And it was honestly almost like flip a coin, right? Dad's Jewish, mom's not. Either one of them were happy to go either way. And I said, how did you end up here? And they said, and this is not meant in any way to disparage other religious traditions. But the dad said, well, here I'm comfortable because my non-Jewish wife is welcome, and the narrative is not that she's going to hell. And at the church, my kids are being taught that I'm going to hell.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
That's an oversimplification, and again, not meant to speak ill of anyone. Right. So I think that when the surface gets scratched, and I think we're actually proof of it, most interfaith families find Judaism and find the synagogue incredibly welcoming. I mean, many of us say this. None of us can tell you how many interfaith families are at Welsh Boulevard Temple because we don't ask. I can kind of tell you, my guess, it's a lot.
Is it
5%, 30%?
Beau's making an important point there. I'm often, less so now because people know my answer, but approach with like, why don't we do a separate thing for interfaith families and a separate program and this? I said, we don't have a special section. We don't have a question on our application. We treat them like every other family, because what makes anyone think that two Jews who get married don't need help raising Jewish children? Of course they do. What makes anyone think that when you're married, two Jews are married, one might be quite ambivalent about Judaism as a religion? It's people are people. So we try to create an atmosphere here where we assume everyone here is curious, everyone belongs, and everyone is welcome.
Beau, just to create a little context for this program, when people come to you and want to begin the conversion program, and this is all just anecdotally, I'm not looking for statistics, but is it your sense that the non-Jew partner is more attracted to Judaism or more kind of moving away from their previous religion? I mean, which direction do you see?
Push or pull?
Yeah, it's a great question, Michael. I would say it's both, and I think others would probably agree with this in their experience. More often than not, if not even the majority of the time, I hear that whatever religious tradition, if someone grew up in one, never really resonated with them, never really felt right to them. We all frequently hear of people who felt like they were Jewish from the time they were 5, and they didn't even know they weren't Jewish because they played with Jewish kids and their mother had to tell them they weren't Jewish, right?
I was like,
right. And so I think it's both, because I think there's frequently something that just in a casual way draws them to Judaism. And then the more they learn about Judaism, then it definitely becomes a big pull. The more they learn, the more they become, frankly, in love with it in most cases.
Here's another question that deals with temple programs from Sarah Kay. Across all temples, there seemed to be a desert, her word, for community and connecting if you are age 40 to 55 and unmarried. There are countless programs for 20s and 30s family programs, and older adults. Do you see this as a problem? If so, what needs to change? My own view is that young married couples have kids, they're involved in school and everything, and it's hard to program adult programming for that particular cohort. But I'm wondering if that's a sufficient excuse, and is anything being contemplated to address that?
Let's kick that to Joel Nickerson. Tell us what you're doing for outreach.
Sure. I don't know if we've specified that demographic that was raised with the question, but I think one of the things that we started really working on and thinking about before this pandemic, so it's been put off because of that, is really how do we make a big place like this feel a lot smaller, and how do we start to build, kind of similar to what Rabbi Leder was talking about, kind of a neighborhood shul. How do we start to look at people based on their geography in the city, their age groups, their interests, and how do we use kind of the small group model that many churches use, mega churches use, to try and bring people together in kind of smaller cohorts. And a lot of what we're trying to think about is how do we reach out to people and really first understand what it is that people need in this community, because it's very easy for us, sitting in our offices to make assumptions about what people want. But if we're not actually finding out from people by talking to them, we can't build programs around that. So I would also say that is a plea to you congregants, that if you need things, or if you feel like there's a gap in what we're offering, you need to tell us, because we're not necessarily going to know about it unless you as the community tell us, so that we can program accordingly. So it's very easy for us already to start to think about the programs and the demographics that already exist. Like, yes, families with young children, very easy for us to begin with focusing on the children, but those adults who are raising those kids also need community and want to be connected to one another irrespective of their children. So that's already a group that we can work on. But then again, there are these other demographics that I would say at this point, we don't necessarily have programs ready for them, but getting the information is going to be the first step for us in talking to people and really trying to do a listening campaign. I think once this pandemic is a little past us, will really help us to then be able to craft things based on where you are in the city, based on your age, based on your interest, so that we can move more in that direction as an institution.
So are you open to emails from congregants to make suggestions?
Absolutely. I think all of us are, yeah, for sure.
Very good. There's another question I want to squeeze in here before we have to wrap up. I was struck by this too. I think watching the services in the main sanctuary today, we saw the choir in a very different setting. And in the Kalenu service, there are musicians that were on the bima. So Ann Rubin asks, are the choirs in the main service during the high holidays a blend of both choirs or something else?
Well, I know this morning in the Glazer campus sanctuary, we had the university choir, and here at university, it was the Wilshire, sanctuary choir. So I think most of the time they're under the direction of the music director of that campus. So, Susan Rosenstein at university had her choir, and they've worked together. And so this year, that's kind of how it's broken down.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think people really did that.
Yeah, this was not the year to get fancy and blending, and we really want to be solid and have people stay in their comfort zone. But I think you're going to see a lot more of a kind of what's the wine term? A meritage, right? Where you blend these different grapes. I think you're gonna see that once the pandemic is a little more under control and we get beyond just the actual heavy lifting of the merger.
Okay, I want to ask this question. I want each of you to kind of answer this. This is a blue sky question. So Wilshire started with a great sanctuary on Wilshire Boulevard. Then we have a West Side campus. Then we have the Carr Center. We have the build out of the schools and the religious schools. We have the camps. And now we have a merger. And now we have this spectacular pavilion that's about to open. And I hope you can give us a date, Steve, when that's finally going to be.
January 9th.
Oh, January 9th. Oh, very good. I hope everybody takes note of that because it's certainly worth a visit. But in the grand scheme of things, blue skying this, what would each of you like to see the next big iteration of Wilshire Boulevard Temple, if such a thing is even possible? And it's years down the road, I'm sure, and who knows who among us will still be here or not be here. But where is the growth potential for Wilshire Boulevard Temple?
I'll go first. I think it depends on what you mean by growth. Obviously, the virtual world is, we all got a kick in the pants and started moving faster than we would have otherwise. But I think the virtual world is a place where there's a lot of potential for growth. I'm not really interested in it in the sense of being a world church sort of a model, because I don't think that really does very much except stroke the ego of who's ever preaching. But if we can use this virtual connection to increase the sense of community of our members, et cetera, and bring more people into the actual synagogue community, I think that would be great. But I'm going to give you an answer that, it might sound shallow, but this is how I really feel. If we could have the kind of endowment that a place as ambitious as Wilshire Boulevard Temple deserves, I have 10 good program ideas a day. I eat, breathe, and sleep Jewish programming, but we don't have the people and we don't have the resources. And the sky really is the limit. Synagogues, not-for-profits, generally, the general rule of thumb is that you should have 5 times your annual budget in your endowment. We have less than 1 year of our annual budget in our endowment. So people think like there's some money tree and Wilshire Boulevard goes, shakes it, and the money falls down. It's not true. We run a very tight, very lean organization, and I'm proud of that. But man, I'll give you one simple idea. I have this idea to convert 6 million people to Judaism to replace the people who died in the Holocaust. I would like to say to any Jewish family, Jews now are having 1.7 children per couple, and replacement rate is 2.1. So we're shrinking demographically. It's not just assimilation. We're literally disappearing. I would like to be able to say to any family that belongs to Wilshire Boulevard Temple, if you'll have a third kid, if you'll do more than replace yourself, if you'll have a third kid, that kid's on us. We'll pay for the nursery school. We'll pay for the elementary school. We'll pay for the Israel trip. We'll pay for the camps. We will remove the economic, opposition in your mind to have that third kid. So I could go on, by the way, and I won't because I want the others to answer. But for me, it's now not about square footage. It's about programmatic resources and human resources, because man, we could do a lot. That Audrey Ermis Pavilion should be the 92nd Street Y of Los Angeles. And I'm just getting it up. So that's where I'm coming from.
I'll jump on that, Steve, a little bit, kind of with the other side of the money piece of it, right? Or in the program piece of it, which is, people say, oh, you should start a high school, or, oh, you should be in the Valley because that would be great. I feel like maybe just because we just are in this merger, but I think the geographic footprint is big enough, right? I think that when we deal with the physical plant at university and other projects we have, the facilities will be good enough. I think it's then about what are we creating in these spaces and facilities, to bring in more of the Jews in Los Angeles who are nowhere, who are looking for meaning in their lives, who are looking for Jewish community, who are looking for a sense of belonging. And that gets to Steve's point of really just being able to have the freedom to be as creative as we possibly can. And some of that freedom has to do with money, and some of that freedom has to do with time, which is also a function of money, to have the bandwidth and capacity, given the relatively lean, based on our size, staff we have. But yeah, to me, the blue sky is just, can we keep creating as many innovative, revolutionary ways for people to engage in the enterprise of Wilshire Boulevard Temple and the enterprise of the Jewish people. And that's what growth, I think, really ultimately is and will be.
Joel's?
Really isn't my platform, but I'll jump at it now. I think, amen and ditto to everything that was just said. I love hearing these ideas. Honestly, for me as well, it's also about the growth of the spiritual home, right? Now that we have these, communities together and, and we're going to be expanding our programming. What does that look like when we go home and when we turn the key and when we open the door? And how will this, enrich our lives when we're home? It's not just, oh, tonight I'm deciding to light Shabbat candles. I'm lighting Shabbat candles because I'm a member of the Wilshire Boulevard community and I learned and I gained this appreciation for this, right? So it is about, how when we're by ourselves or when we're just in our individual family units, however we describe that to be, how has this community impacted us so much that the home really is the Mikdash Me'at, right? That it is that mini sanctuary because of what we have learned from this place.
I would just add, I think the one campus that we still have to develop is the digital campus. Steve kind of referred to it. I think we have the potential, and I think if we look not only with this pandemic, but with the future of how people engage with community and how they engage with information, that we have a responsibility and an opportunity to take all the things that we do in person and also think about what's the digital version of that. How do we not only engage our members, but how do we take our messaging and what we do in this institution across all the different streams of what we do? And how do we share that so that other communities that don't have the resources, don't have the opportunities that we have, can actually benefit from our model of Jewish living and learning? And that I think we have a great opportunity to help other communities grow, to be able to develop other angles that they hadn't thought about, for them to start their own Karsh Center, for us to franchise the Karsh Center across the country, because we have a model that works and we can do a turnkey thing that helps other institutions start that, where people can learn and pray online or then join us in person. And I'd say the other thing is, I think we have our physical plants, and how do we get into the streets? Like, how do we get a whole team of our people to go out into the neighborhoods and be with people, similar to what Joel was saying, in their homes, but that you don't need to schlep necessarily to the synagogue to experience a Wilshire Boulevard experience. You can do it in your neighborhood, you can do it in your home. And how do we build that as well?
I want a fleet of food trucks to go to neighborhoods on, for Shabbat dinner, and we bring people together. The sky really is the limit, and it's a great question. As per Joel's last point, please, everyone watching, make sure you're following us at Wilshire Boulevard Temple on Instagram. Don't forget, okay? Because it's a nice way to stay in touch and know what's happening.
And just as a footnote to that, Jordan Levin wants to encourage you to keep all services online, so others like him who have moved away can still remain part of the community. So we're just about out of time. I want to thank all of you. I promised the two Joels I wouldn't ask them for a tour of their best library.
I told you we run a tight budget here.
I was going to say the contrast is pretty stark here.
Yeah. Thank you all. My apologies to all the congregants who submitted questions I couldn't get to. There were quite a few of them. Some were way over my head that I couldn't even get my arms around. But I hope you found this entertaining, enlightening, and helpful, and spiritual and soulful. And a lot of people said, "Can't we do this more often?"
Yes.
The answer is yes.
If you guys want to do it, I'm happy to play the role of Alex Trebek here and keep the ball moving. So thank you all very much. And we'll see you in synagogue.
See you in half an hour. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thanks, Mike.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It was
you guys.
a lot of fun.
Give Joan a hug, okay?
She's right here.
Joan.
You can hug her yourself.